Hey all, and welcome back to Fuzzy Dutsy Gaming, and the second installment on my League Start testing. So in the first episode we went through Necromancer Summoner. This time we're going with the Dominate Blow Guardian. Now in the last video I felt like I spent a bit too much time going through the transition of gems and that sort of thing, when really it will be in the Path of Building, and most of the people that consume YouTube content are going to be more familiar with Path of Building and would rather read what they need to do than me kind of handhold all the way through. So we will start with leveling, and I'll just quickly summarize how I leveled the build. There's lots of different ways to do it, and I think as long as you end up roughly in the same place by Act 5, you're going to have a great leveling experience. So the way I leveled was very similar to the Summoner, in that we go Holy Flame Totem and Skeletons. Then once we get a 4-link, Multi-Strike, and our first Ascendency, then we go into Dominating Blow when we pick up a 4-link. So essentially, what you're looking for to progress into the Dominate and Blow build is a 4-link that contains Fortify, Multi-Strike, obviously a Dominating Blow gem, and then minion damage. That's what I used. Multi-Strike is really important because A, it speeds up your attack and you repeat your attack. And the way Dominating Blow minions work is that every time you hit an enemy, when that enemy dies, they will then summon as a sentinel. You essentially put a debuff on the enemy when you hit them, and then regardless of who kills that enemy, a sentinel will get raised. Now because of this, I also run Herald of Purity, because that also adds to the minions, and they are summoned in similar ways, but for a normal sentinel you have to kill the enemy, and then if you hit a rare enemy you have a chance to spawn a Sentinel of Purity. And then to go along with all of this, I also ran some zombies and a golem with Feeding Frenzy. Now the reasoning behind the zombies is that your first Ascendency gives you Onslaught if you've got 5 nearby allies. Having 6 or 7 zombies, you'll always have 5 nearby allies. They also early on can kill enemies, so it can help in spawning more minions. So for example, at the beginning when you've got no dominant minions out, if your zombies help you kill a couple of enemies that you've hit, then that will spawn minions. Because early on, you're probably not going to have much DPS on your own. So the carrion golem and the zombie really help. But really, in a zone, once you get 2 or 3 minions up, you're set. Because as long as you hit an enemy, even if the minion then kills them, it'll spawn another minion and you can have up to 9. And that's kind of how I went. I went attack speed, hit as many enemies as I can. Zombies help me finish off the first 2 or 3 enemies, and then you're good to go and you sail through each zone. So before we move on to mapping, let's quickly go through the auras that you can run. Now these are dependent on whether you want to go offensive or defensive. I went on the defensive side as they're going to be pretty squishy until we get our Uber Lab done and get some gear with block and recover life on block. Now the must-haves for me are a movement skill, Desecrate, an Offering. I use Flesh Offering for extra minion attack speed. You want to link Maim to your Golem and Feeding Frenzy and add another damage link to Herald of Purity. I would add Multi-Strike if you can afford the reservation. If you're struggling with reservation, you can add Ruthless as it has a really small mana multiplier. And then I would add something like War Banner so that enemies near you take additional physical damage. Now I, on top of that, run Summon Holy Relic for life regen to us and minions, Vitality for the same reason, and Clarity so that I don't have to worry about mana as we use a lot. Now, if you have room for vulnerability, you can add this in, but this might mean using an unset ring. To see the end setup I got to on this character, just visit my profile, Adder79 on Path of Exile, and then you're looking for the character DomBlowBoyFuzzy in SSF Ultimatum. Now if the league's finished by the time you watch the video, it will have moved to SSF Standard. Now for loot filters, I just use TIE Killer's leveling filters, which if you want to access, just go to pathofexile.com, game and item filters, and his appear in the most popular list. You're looking for AAA Melee, and AAAA Caster, and then just click the follow button and it'll add the loot filters to your game. So I used the Caster one for the first 3 acts, and then when I started looking for my DomBlow gear, I changed to Melee. When you get a 5-link, you want to add in Brutality, and if you're lucky enough to get a 6-link, I'd recommend juggling the setup a bit and adding Impale, and then swapping your War Banner for a Dread Banner, and then link that with Generosity so that your minions get the effect of it. You might need to drop a gem or 2 to fit this in, which at this stage would probably be the Curse gem, as we can look for a Curse on hit ring. This leads us really well into endgame because you really want to be adding cluster jewels that have got minion impale nodes on them, so this sets us up well for that. However, the 5-link setup will get you well into red maps and collect at least 16 of your watchstones with relative comfort. For weapons, I would recommend early on and even up to red maps just concentrate on attack speed. Damage and minion damage are nice, but it's way more important that we get our minions up quickly, which means hitting as many enemies as possible, as many times as possible. We can always look for a much better weapon later on. Now that covers off general gearing and leveling for mapping, so let's just close the video by talking about what I find are the pros and cons of the build. So pros, it's again a really cheap league starter and 100% SSS viable. It's really fun to play, especially for a minion build. It's got really good clear speed, and the bossing is amazing when your minions are already up, such as maps and conquerors. It can be scaled to endgame in numerous ways, and I've seen people push this into tens of millions of DPS. And overall, it's a pretty good all-rounder for all content. Certainly from my experience, Legion was fine, Blight was fine, Breach was good. There wasn't really anything where I come across it and I was like, this is absolutely horrible. Now, there are some cons. Boss fights where you can't get your minions up or build them up are pretty tough. So we have to hit quite a few times to get all our minions up, and then we have to keep hitting every now and again to make sure that they stay spawned. Now, I think dropping zombies and then adding a worm flask would fix this, but it's not something I've looked at because I didn't have the flask drop. So you'll see from the clips in my 5 boss fight in Maven, that's a prime example. So Piety and Brutus spawned instantly, and then the Graveyard boss summoned not far behind them, and they're 3 bosses that aren't very nice to have in tandem because they've all got really big AoE attacks, so there's nowhere really safe to go, and I just couldn't get close enough to get all my minions off to start doing damage. Without high attack and movement speed, it can feel a little clunky, especially if you don't have very good movement speed or attack speed. You might find that you can't keep up with your minions, so you might struggle to get hits in on enemies before the minion destroys them. But once you get something like 25% movement speed boost and a decent attacks per second weapon, you won't see this as an issue. And then the last con is it can be squishy before you get every piece of the puzzle in place. Obviously, if you're going softcore, it doesn't matter too much. But all we've really got is Fortify and Life and a tiny bit of block, and that's what we've got to keep us alive. Once we get block gear and then we get our last Ascendency point, then it adds a lot more defensive nature to the build. Now, I think if I don't get brave and try one of the new skills this league, I'm definitely league starting DomBlow. And then I'll try and stream live every day for the first week of the league. So just drop by and say hello. So in conclusion, if you think the build looks interesting, I'd recommend giving it a practice run. I'm sure you won't regret it. And then regarding endgame builds, there are tons of great guides around. So I'm not going to go much further than this with this build because I can't really add anything to what's already available. So there'll be plenty of links to check out in the description of different channels that I know have done some really good DomBlow builds. And that covers off this guide. This is part 2. I don't know what I'm doing next, but there'll certainly be one coming in the next week. If you have enjoyed this content, please leave a like and think about subscribing. And if you want to know when the next episode comes out, click the notification button. So thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you on the next video.